Welcome to Unit 7, where we explore Africa since the 1960s, focusing on the United Nations and social justices. This section covers the road to independence and the rise of independent states in Africa. We will examine the last years of colonial rule and the struggle for independence across the continent. The national liberation movements in Africa generally followed two courses: violent and nonviolent. In West Africa, political independence was achieved with relative ease because there was no significant number of white settlers. Nationalist movements in West Africa had a long history and better experience, enabling them to provide leadership and facilitate the struggle for independence. Nationalist agitation in British West Africa was particularly strong in the Gold Coast, now Ghana, and Nigeria. The nationalist struggle in these two countries was led by extremely capable leaders: Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria and Kwame Nkrumah of the Gold Coast. Azikiwe and Nkrumah were both educated in the USA and returned to their countries in the 1930s and 1940s, respectively. Between 1945 and 1954, there were bitter clashes among African nationalists, mainly in the Gold Coast and Nigeria. Nationalists of the Gold Coast accused British officials of trying to maintain their rule by claiming to train Africans in the management of a modern state. As a result of nationalist pressure in the Gold Coast and Nigeria, the African nations of West Africa were able to gain full political independence. Ghana, formerly the Gold Coast, achieved independence in March 1957. Nigeria followed, gaining its independence in October 1960. Sierra Leone became independent in April 1961, and Gambia achieved independence in February 1964. These were all former British West African colonies. After the end of the Second World War, France recognized the need to grant more political and civil rights to the colonial peoples of French West Africa. In the beginning, the French government was not ready to grant full independence to its colonies in Africa after the Second World War. France initially preferred to offer the colonies rights only as part of an association with France itself. As part of this association, France introduced reforms, allowing each colony in French West Africa to elect a territorial assembly. Compared to the pre-war situation in the French colonies, the introduction of a territorial assembly was considered significant progress. However, these reforms were not fully adequate, primarily because the colonies were not granted legislative power. The laws for each colony in French West Africa were still promulgated by the French Minister of Colonies in Paris, leading radical nationalists to demand unconditional full independence. In 1958, General Charles de Gaulle became French president, and a new French constitution was issued that same year. De Gaulle intended to transform the French Union into a French community under the new constitution. Each colony in French West Africa was planned to hold a referendum on the new constitution. The colonies of French West Africa were to choose between voting yes to become autonomous republics within the French community or voting no to become immediately independent outside the community. According to de Gaulle, those who chose no in the referendum would lose all French economic and technical assistance. Since the economies of French West African colonies were highly dependent on French assistance, voting no seemed dangerous, leading almost all colonies to vote yes. Only Guinea voted no and became fully independent in 1958. Other colonies became autonomous within the French community, while France immediately stopped all assistance to Guinea. Sékou Touré, Guinea's first president, turned to the Soviets. The USSR quickly responded, filling the gaps created by the French withdrawal. The Soviet advance into Guinea worried France very much. At the same time, leaders of other French West African colonies began to demand full independence. By November 1960, all French West African colonies had achieved full independence. All of them, except Guinea, maintained close ties with France. The year 1960 is commonly known as Africa Year because 17 French colonies achieved independence in that year. The independent French colonies in 1960 included Cameroon, Togo, Dahomey, Niger, Upper Volta, Ivory Coast, Chad, Ubangi-Chari, Middle Congo, Gabon, Senegal, French Sudan, and Mauritania. In colonies with many white settlers, the colonial powers were unwilling to grant independence easily. The people in these areas had to wage an armed struggle. One such example is Algeria, which had been a French colony since 1830. The French administered Algeria as part of France. In Algeria, there were large numbers of white settlers, known as colons. In 1960, there were around 1 million colons who considered Algeria a part of France. Until the end of the Second World War, many Algerian elites, including Ferhat Abbas, considered Algeria as part of France. After the Second World War, the enthusiasm for French nationalism declined. Ferhat Abbas and others began to demand independence. The colons fought to resist Algerian independence. The Algerian freedom fighters had to fight a bloody war against both the French government and the white settlers. The Algerian War of Independence began in November 1954. Its leaders were mainly former soldiers of the French army and Algerians of peasant origin. Ben Bella was one of the leaders of the struggle for independence and became the first president of independent Algeria. Ben Bella and his followers first formed the Revolutionary Committee for Unity and Action to fight for independence, which later became the National Liberation Front, or FLN. The FLN grew very strong, mainly due to financial support from Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, and the Arab League. By 1956, it was a highly organized fighting force in Algeria. The Algerian War of Independence had a big political impact on France. The prolonged war led to the downfall of the French Fourth Republic and brought General Charles de Gaulle back to power in May 1958.